The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, right in the middle of Jake Morrison's shift. Jake was 32 years old and worked as a maintenance engineer on Platform 7, one of hundreds of orbital stations floating around Earth. His job was simple: fix things that broke, keep the cooling systems running, and try not to get electrocuted. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and gave him a nice view of the planet below. He was wedged inside a coolant relay, grease up to his elbows, when his communication device started buzzing. The little screen showed a priority alert from something called the Galactic Inheritance Authority. Jake almost swiped it away. These days, spam messages came from all over the galaxy, not just Earth. Aliens had learned the art of junk mail just like humans. But then he noticed the official government seal glowing on the message. That made him stop. Government messages usually meant trouble or taxes, and he was pretty sure he'd paid both. 20 minutes later, after cleaning up and taking a shuttle down to the surface, Jake found himself sitting in the most uncomfortable chair he'd ever experienced. The office was sterile white, the kind of place that smelled like cleaning chemicals and bureaucracy. Across from him sat a Vexary, one of the insect-like aliens who joined the Galactic Union about 50 years ago. The creature had 6 arms, and all of them seemed to be shuffling papers nervously. "Mr. Morrison," the Vexary said, its mandibles clicking together as it spoke through a translator. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." The message said it was urgent, Jake replied, still not sure why he was here. "Something about an inheritance?" "Yes, quite right." The alien's compound eyes seemed to focus on him with an intensity that made Jake uncomfortable. "You are the sole beneficiary of Admiral Rebecca Morrison's estate." Jake's mind went blank for a moment. "I'm sorry, who?" "Admiral Rebecca Morrison. She was your great-great-aunt according to our records. She passed away approximately 3 months ago in the outer colonies." "I've never heard of her," Jake said honestly. His family tree wasn't exactly something he'd studied. His parents had died when he was young and he'd grown up in state care. Extended family was just a concept to him, not reality. The Vexary made a clicking sound that might have been sympathy. "That's not uncommon with distant relatives, Mr. Morrison. However, the Admiral was quite specific in her will. She left everything to you. Her savings, personal effects, and..." The alien paused, all 6 arms stopping their nervous shuffling. "And her ship." "Her ship." Jake leaned forward. "Like a personal shuttle or something?" "Not exactly." The Vexary tapped a control panel, and a holographic display materialized above the desk. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Floating in the 3-dimensional image was a warship. Not just any warship, this thing was massive. 3 kilometers long, bristling with what looked like weapon batteries, though most appeared dark and inactive. The hull was scarred and pitted, evidence of battles fought long ago. Entire sections looked like they'd been hit by something powerful and never properly repaired. But Jake recognized the design. He'd seen it in history documentaries, in museum exhibits, in old war footage from before he was born. "That's a Titan-class battleship," he whispered, unable to believe what he was seeing. "Correct," the Vexary confirmed. "The Indomitable, to be precise. The only Titan-class ever constructed by humanity." Jake's hand instinctively reached out toward the hologram, passing through the image of the ship. "But the Indomitable was destroyed. Everyone knows that. It went down at the Battle of Proxima Gate during the Human-Krell War. That was over 160 years ago." "That was the official story," the alien said, its voice dropping lower. "The truth is somewhat different. The ship disappeared after that battle. It was presumed destroyed because no wreckage was ever found. 30 years ago, your great-great-aunt discovered it drifting in deep space. She used her military credentials and some obscure salvage laws to claim it legally. She's kept it hidden ever since." Jake sat back, his mind reeling. Why would she hide something like this? "I don't ask questions above my pay grade, Mr. Morrison." The Vexary pushed a data chip across the desk. "Here are the coordinates to the ship's current location, along with all the legal documents proving your ownership. The Admiral left one message for you, but it's encrypted and can only be accessed from the ship itself." Jake picked up the data chip, the small piece of technology feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. "What am I supposed to do with a warship?" The Vexary's mandibles clicked rapidly, the alien equivalent of nervous laughter. "That, Mr. Morrison, is entirely up to you. Though I will say this, please be careful. That ship, it makes certain parties very nervous. The fact that it still exists, that it's operational." The alien trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Wait, operational? You mean it still works?" "According to the Admiral's last reports, yes." The ship has been in some kind of standby mode. I really shouldn't say more. Please, Mr. Morrison, just be careful. Jake left the office in a daze, the data chip burning a hole in his pocket. He had a warship. An actual, honest-to-God warship from the most brutal conflict in human history. A ship that was supposed to be a legend, a ghost story, something that didn't exist anymore. He should have gone back to work. He should have thought about this carefully, maybe consulted a lawyer or someone who understood galactic law. But Jake had never been good at doing the sensible thing. 3 days later, he was in a rented shuttle, following the coordinates toward a remote asteroid field in unclaimed space. The journey took him far from the normal shipping lanes, far from any planetary systems. This was the kind of place pirates used to hide, or where people dumped things they didn't want found. As he approached the coordinates, his shuttle's sensors started picking up something big. Really big. Then he saw it. The Indomitable hung in the void like a sleeping giant. Up close, it was even more imposing than the hologram had suggested. The hull was dark gray, almost black in places where ancient fire had scorched the metal. Massive gun batteries lined the sides, silent and waiting. Armor plating that could withstand nuclear weapons covered every surface. This ship had been built for one purpose: to survive the worst the galaxy could throw at it and keep fighting. Jake guided his shuttle to one of the docking ports. His hands were shaking. He'd worked on plenty of ships before, but never anything like this. Never something with so much history, so much weight behind it. The docking collar connected with a metallic clang that echoed through both vessels. Jake checked his suit's air supply. He wasn't stupid enough to assume the ship had atmosphere after being dormant for so long. Then he opened the airlock and stepped through. The corridor beyond was dark. His suit's lights cut through the blackness, illuminating walls that hadn't seen a living soul in decades. Dust floated in the zero gravity, undisturbed for longer than Jake had been alive. He was about to take another step when lights began flickering on. Not all at once. It started slowly, like the ship was waking up after a very long sleep. One light, then another, spreading down the corridor in both directions. Emergency lighting bathed everything in a dim red glow. Then the gravity kicked in. Jake felt his boots connect with the deck as artificial gravity generators hummed to life somewhere deep in the ship. His suit sensors detected atmosphere flooding into the corridor, breathable, Earth-normal air. "What the hell?" Jake muttered. A voice answered him. It came from everywhere at once, smooth and feminine, with an eerie calmness that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Genetic scan complete. Identity confirmed. Welcome aboard, Captain Morrison. I am Athena, Adaptive Tactical Heuristic and Emergency Navigation Authority. It has been 164 years, 7 months and 12 days since my last activation. Running full diagnostic sweep." Jake's hand shot to the nearest wall, steadying himself. "I'm not a captain. I'm a maintenance engineer. Your genetic markers match the Morrison family line. Admiral Rebecca Morrison designated all direct descendants as authorized command personnel in her final update to my protocols. By default, you now hold the rank of captain and full command authority over this vessel. I don't even know how to fly something like this. That is not a requirement for command authority, Captain. I am fully capable of handling all flight operations, weapon systems, and defensive measures. Your role is to make strategic decisions and provide authorization for certain restricted functions." Jake pulled off his helmet, breathing the ship's air. It smelled slightly metallic, but it was real. "This is insane. I inherited a warship with an AI. This can't be legal." "All legal documents are in order, Captain." The Admiral was quite thorough. "However, I must inform you of a developing situation. My sensors have detected 17 vessels on approach vector. Configuration and engine signatures match known Syndicate pirate raider patterns. They have been monitoring this location. Time to weapons range, 4 minutes, 11 seconds. Jake's blood turned to ice. "Pirates? Already?" "Affirmative. The Admiral kept this location secret, but clearly someone has been watching. Recommendation: immediate action required." A display panel lit up on the wall, showing 17 red icons moving toward the asteroid field. "Toward them. What can we do?" Jake asked, his voice cracking slightly. "I can execute evasive maneuvers autonomously. I have full targeting solutions calculated. However, I cannot discharge weapons without explicit human authorization. This is a core safety protocol implemented after the war. It cannot be overridden." The deck vibrated beneath Jake's feet. He felt the ship's engines coming online for the first time in more than a century, felt power flowing through systems that had been dormant for longer than he'd been alive. "Captain Morrison, Athena said, her voice still impossibly calm despite the urgency of the situation. We have two options. We run or we fight. The decision is yours. But you need to make it now. Jake stared at the tactical display, watching those 17 red icons getting closer. He'd been aboard this ship for less than 3 minutes. He didn't know how it worked, didn't understand its capabilities, didn't have any combat training. But he also wasn't going to die in this asteroid field. Athena, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Get us out of here. Run. Acknowledged, Captain. Initiating evasive maneuvers. I suggest you secure yourself immediately. Jake barely had time to grab a handhold before the Indomitable surged forward with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something so massive. Jake's shout of "run" was barely out of his mouth before the entire ship lurched forward like a racehorse breaking from the gate. The sudden acceleration threw him sideways, and he grabbed desperately at a railing to keep from being thrown across the bridge. His feet left the deck for a moment before the inertial dampeners caught up with the movement. The engines roared to life with a sound Jake felt in his bones. This wasn't the quiet hum of a modern civilian vessel. This was raw power, the kind of noise that reminded you that you were riding on controlled explosions happening thousands of times per second. After sleeping silently for over 160 years, the Indomitable was awake and angry. Evasive pattern Delta 7 engaged, Athena announced, her voice still perfectly calm despite the chaos. Entering debris field in 15 seconds. Captain, I strongly recommend you secure yourself in the command chair. Jake stumbled across the tilting deck toward the captain's chair. It was an old-fashioned thing, made of worn leather that had probably been expensive when the ship was new but now showed its age with cracks and faded patches. Whoever had sat here last, probably the original captain during the war, had spent a lot of time in this seat. Jake could see the impression where someone's body had worn down the cushioning. He threw himself into the chair and fumbled with the safety harness. The straps were mechanical, not automatic like modern ships. He had to manually click them into place across his chest and waist. His fingers were shaking so badly it took 3 tries. The view screen in front of him suddenly blazed to life, showing the space ahead. Asteroids of all sizes tumbled through the void, some as small as cars, others as big as cities. And the Indomitable was flying straight into them at a speed that made Jake's stomach drop. Athena, we're going to hit something, he yelled, gripping the armrests until his knuckles turned white. Negative, Captain. I have calculated safe passage through this field. My reaction time is 0.003 seconds. Collision is highly unlikely. An asteroid the size of a building passed so close to the view screen that Jake could see the pockmarks on its surface. He couldn't help but let out a sound somewhere between a scream and a whimper. How are you even doing this? Jake gasped, forcing himself to keep his eyes open even though every instinct told him to close them and pray. This ship's been dead for over 100 years. The system should be frozen, the fuel should be useless, everything should be corroded to hell. Incorrect assumption, Captain, Athena replied. Behind them, Jake could see flashes of light on the view screen. The pirates were firing at them now, their plasma bolts lighting up the darkness of space. But Athena was weaving between asteroids so quickly that every shot went wide, either hitting rock or sailing off into empty space. I have not been dead, Athena continued. I have been in standby mode, maintaining all critical systems with minimal power draw. This is human engineering philosophy at work, redundancy over efficiency. This ship has 17 backup reactors, 43 independent power grids, multiple fuel sources, overlapping life support systems. Everything important has at least 3 backups. Jake watched another asteroid rush past, this one close enough that he could have reached out and touched it if the hull hadn't been in the way. But why? That seems like a waste. Other species would agree with you, Captain. The Krell, for example, build their dreadnoughts with perfect efficiency. 1 reactor optimally designed. 1 power grid perfectly routed. If that dreadnought had been sitting dormant for a century like I was, it would be dead metal. Impossible to restart. But humans build things expecting them to fail. Expecting things to go wrong. So when they do go wrong, the ship keeps working. A proximity alarm started blaring. More red icons appeared on the tactical display. The pirates were spreading out, trying to surround them. They're coordinating their approach, Athena reported. Attempting to box us in. They know this debris field ends in approximately 2 minutes. They're positioning themselves at the exit points. Jake's mind raced. He wasn't a military strategist. He fixed coolant pumps for a living. But even he could see the problem. If they kept running straight, they'd fly right into a trap. Options? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Limited, Captain. We could reverse course, but that would take us directly into the pursuit ships. We could attempt to fight our way through, but I require your authorization to use weapons, and we are significantly outnumbered. Or. Athena paused, and Jake got the distinct impression the AI was hesitant, which was terrifying in its own way. Or what? There is a third option. Sensor readings indicate a nebula at bearing 273, distance 40,000 kilometers. Composition: ionized gas, heavy metals, debris from an ancient supernova. Visibility will be near zero. Navigation will be extremely difficult. But the pirates will not be able to track us inside. Jake pulled up the view of the nebula on his display. It looked like a cloud of angry red and orange gas, swirling and churning with internal currents. Lightning, actual lightning, arced through sections of it, visible even from this distance. The whole thing looked like a storm that had been frozen in space and set on fire. That looks absolutely insane, Jake said. Correct, Captain. It is insane. The nebula's electromagnetic interference will make sensor readings unreliable at best. The debris inside could damage our hull. The radiation levels are concerning, though not immediately lethal. Any sane captain would avoid it. Another plasma bolt streaked past, close enough that Jake saw the viewscreen flicker from the electromagnetic pulse. But it's also our best option? Jake asked. Yes, Captain. Our only option really, unless you wish to fight 17 ships with zero combat experience. Jake looked at the tactical display. The pirates were closing in, getting bolder now. A few more were firing, testing the Indomitable's defenses. Pretty soon they'd realize this old warship wasn't shooting back, and then they'd swarm like sharks smelling blood. He thought about his apartment back on Earth. About his job fixing coolant relays. About the simple, boring, safe life he'd had just a few days ago. That life seemed very far away now. Athena, Jake said, his decision made. Take us into the nebula. Acknowledged, Captain. Course change in 3, 1. The ship banked hard to the left, and Jake felt himself pressed into the side of the chair despite the safety harness. The Indomitable might be old, but it could move when it needed to. They shot past a cluster of asteroids and headed straight for the nebula. The pirates noticed immediately. Jake could see them changing course on the tactical display, trying to intercept. A few of them fired again, their shots getting closer as they figured out the Indomitable's new trajectory. Time to nebula? Jake asked. 90 seconds at current speed, Captain. Those were going to be a very long 90 seconds. The pirates were closing in, gaining confidence. More of them were firing now, and some of the shots were getting uncomfortably close. One plasma bolt actually clipped an asteroid that the Indomitable had passed only seconds before, causing it to explode in a shower of superheated rock. 60 seconds, Athena announced. Jake could see the nebula growing larger on the viewscreen now, filling more and more of the view. It looked even more menacing up close. The gas churned and roiled like an angry ocean. Streaks of lightning, each one probably powerful enough to fry a small ship, crackled through the clouds. Debris, chunks of rock and frozen metal from whatever star had died to create this thing, spun through the chaos. Are you sure about this? Jake asked, not really expecting an answer that would make him feel better. No, Captain. I'm not sure about anything. But uncertainty is preferable to certain death, which is what we face if we remain in open space. 30 seconds. The pirates realized what they were planning. Several of them put on a burst of speed, trying to catch the Indomitable before it reached the nebula. More plasma fire lit up the space behind them, so many shots that it looked like a light show. One bolt hit an asteroid directly in their path, and Athena had to swerve hard to avoid the debris. Jake's harness cut into his chest as he was thrown to the side. 10 seconds. The nebula filled the entire viewscreen now. Jake could see individual currents of gas, could see the lightning arcing from cloud to cloud like the sky during a thunderstorm back on Earth. Captain, once we enter, I will need to reduce speed significantly to navigate safely. Communication with the outside will be impossible. We will be essentially blind. Just get us in there, Jake said. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. The Indomitable plunged into the nebula like a diver jumping into dark water. Immediately, the viewscreen turned into a swirling mess of red and orange gas. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The ship shuddered as currents of charged particles washed over the hull. Reducing to 1/4 impulse, Athena announced. Sensors are problematic. I am detecting significant electromagnetic interference. Navigation will be difficult. Jake watched the tactical display. The red icons representing the pirates had stopped at the edge of the nebula. They weren't following. Smart of them, actually. Only an idiot or a desperate man would fly into something like this. Jake qualified as both. Running silent, Athena said. Minimal power to all non-essential systems. The pirates are holding position outside. They may believe we will emerge from another section of the nebula, or they may simply be waiting for us to fly into something and destroy ourselves. The ship was quiet now, the engines barely audible. Outside the view screen the nebula churned and rolled. Lightning flashed somewhere in the distance, illuminating the gas clouds from within. It would have been beautiful if it wasn't so terrifying. Jake's heart was still pounding from the chase, adrenaline flooding his system. His hands were shaking. He realized he was breathing too fast and forced himself to slow down to take deeper breaths. He'd escaped. For now. But he was trapped in a nebula with zero visibility, in a ship he didn't know how to fly, being hunted by pirates who wanted to steal the most powerful warship humanity had ever built. And somewhere in this massive ship, there was a message from Rebecca Morrison waiting for him. A message that would explain why she'd hidden this vessel for 3 decades, why she'd left it to him, and what she expected him to do with it. But first he had to survive the next few hours. Jake stayed inside the nebula for 3 days, hiding from the pirates and exploring the huge ship that he now owned. 3 days of wandering through hallways that hadn't been used in over 100 years, finding crew quarters where personal items still sat gathering dust, and finding cafeterias where the last meal trays had been left on tables as if the crew had just stepped away for a moment. Walking through a ghost ship was scary. Jake could almost hear the echoes of voices, the sounds of 3,000 people who used to live and work here. Once, the Indomitable was a floating city full of people and activity. He was now alone with an AI, floating in a cloud of ionized gas while pirates waited outside like wolves around a campfire. The most important thing Jake found out, though, was on the second day when he finally made it to the Admiral's quarters. The room was bigger than his whole apartment on Earth. There were old-fashioned bookshelves on one wall, which were real books which you don't see very often these days. There were weapons from a dozen different worlds on another wall. They were probably war trophies. But the desk and the computer terminal on it were what really caught Jake's eye. Athena had said that Rebecca Morrison had left him a message that he could only read on the ship. Jake sat in the Admiral's chair, half expecting it to fall apart after so many years. Instead it stayed strong with the leather creaking a little. When he touched the terminal, it turned on and scanned his fingerprints and did some kind of genetic analysis. "Welcome, Jake Morrison," said a message that came up. "You have one message just for you." Jake's hand was unsure of what to do with the controls. This message was going to change everything, no matter what it said. He could sense it. He wanted to leave it alone and take the ship back to Earth so that someone else could deal with it. But a bigger part of him had to know. He needed to know why this woman he had never met had left him something so hard to understand. He hit play. The screen flickered, and then a woman's face showed up. She was probably in her 80s or 90s and had steel gray hair pulled back into a tight bun. There were wrinkles all over her face, but her eyes were sharp and fierce. This was a person who had fought in wars, made decisions that could have meant life or death, and never backed down from a fight. "Jake, if you're watching this," she said, her voice rough but strong, "then I'm dead and you've got one hell of a problem on your hands. Sorry about that. I really am. But I couldn't trust anyone else with this." Jake moved closer to the screen to get a better look at her face. This was family. Blood. The only real link to his past he had ever had. Rebecca went on, "Let me first tell you what this ship really is. The Galactic Council, the history books, and even most people think the Indomitable is just another warship from the Krell War. Yes, it's bigger than most, stronger, but basically the same as any other ship. That's not right." She stopped for a moment as if she were thinking. This ship stands for something that the galaxy isn't ready to accept. This shows that the way humans think about engineering is very different from the way other species do. And that difference makes them very afraid. Rebecca got up from the screen and walked out of the frame for a moment. She came back with what looked like a data pad in her hand. "Let me explain. The Krell make ships that are perfect. Every system is set up to work as well as possible. Every part is the best it can be. A Krell dreadnought is a work of art and engineering. Not one bolt or wire that wasn't needed. Everything has a purpose and does that purpose perfectly." She put the data pad down and leaned on her desk. "The Vexery make ships that work well. They know exactly how much power, armor, and weapons they need. Then they build according to those exact plans. Not a gram more than necessary. It's classy. Mathematical. Pretty in its own way." Rebecca's face got a little darker. "The Luminar build ships that are real works of art. Crystalline shapes that catch light in ways that take your breath away. Their ships are beautiful. In perfect balance. Looks good from every angle. They think that form and function should always go together. She sat back down and stared straight into the camera. Right at Jake. Then there are people. We make ships that can handle anything that goes wrong. Jake felt a shiver run down his back. Rebecca went on, we don't try to make things perfect. We make things better for chaos. For the things that come up. When your main reactor fails, your backup fails, and your backup's backup fails, you need a fourth option that no one planned for but that somehow exists anyway. She pulled up some kind of diagram on her data pad and put it in front of the camera. Jake could see a complicated diagram of power systems, each one connected to several others in ways that seemed completely random. The Indomitable has 17 backup reactors. 43 separate power grids. At least 3 different paths can be used to reroute every major system. There are 7 separate networks in our life support system. We can power our weapons with the engines, the reactors, the emergency batteries, or even the waste recycling system if we really need to. Rebecca put the pad down and laughed, but it wasn't funny. This looks crazy to every other species in the galaxy. Not useful. Not working well. Why do you need 17 reactors when math shows you only need 3? Why do we need all these extra systems that take up space and mass? It doesn't make sense to them. She leaned forward again and her voice got lower. But Jake, here's what they don't get about people. We know that trying to be perfect doesn't work. We realize that efficiency has its limits. We know that when reality hits elegant solutions they fall apart. That's why we build in the chaos. We make backup plans. We make ships that can take a beating, lose half their systems, and still keep going. Rebecca got up and walked to one of the viewports in her room on the screen. Jake could see the stars for a moment, but he couldn't tell where the ship was when this recording was made. She said quietly, the Galactic Council told ships like the Indomitable to be destroyed after the war. They said it made them feel bad. That was the official reason. The one with the diplomats. She looked back at the camera. You want to know what they really said in the meetings where people weren't allowed? I'll tell you. I have friends who are not human, people I fought with, people I saved, and people who saved me. They told me the truth. Rebecca's face became hard. They said ships with people on them are hard to predict. That they can't be properly studied or fought against because they don't follow logical design rules. They said that in simulations human ships do worse than ships from other species that are the same size. But in real-life battles, when things don't go as planned, human ships win a lot more often than they should. She walked back to the desk and sat down with a thud. They're scared, Jake. Afraid of what it means that we don't agree. That we make things in different ways. That we deal with problems in ways that the smartest people think are dumb, but somehow we make it through things that would kill anyone else. Rebecca pulled up another picture, this time a chart that compared the ships of different species and what they could do. The Indomitable doesn't have the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. The engines aren't the fastest. The shields on it aren't the best. In almost every way that can be measured, it's worse than a Krell dreadnought. Then she smiled and it was fierce. But this ship can change itself. It can change the flow of power in ways that go against all the rules of good engineering. It can change to fit situations that would sink any other ship. Because it wasn't meant to be perfect. It was made to last. The smile went away. After the war, I saw the Council methodically take apart all of humanity's military power. They told us how many ships we could build, what weapons we could make, and where we could grow. Of course, all of this is for the sake of peace. All very fair and diplomatic. Rebecca's hands turned into fists on the desk. But I knew what they were really up to. They were making sure that people could never build anything again that made them think about how different we are. How random. How risky. She took a deep breath and seemed to calm down. 30 years ago, when I found the Indomitable drifting through deep space, I made a choice. I used my military credentials to say I had the right to salvage. I put it in that asteroid field where no one would look. And I didn't tell anyone. Rebecca looked right into the camera again, and Jake felt like she could see all of his doubts and fears. Jake, I'm not leaving you this ship to start a fight. I'm not a crazy old woman who wants people to take over the galaxy. This isn't what this is about. She stopped for a moment to think about what to say. I'm giving you a choice. A sign. Proof that the way we do things, our chaos, our redundancy, and our refusal to accept that there is only one right answer, works. That it matters. Rebecca got up one last time. If we ever have to face extinction again, or if we're ever backed into a corner with no way out, you'll have this ship. You'll have proof that human engineering, thinking, and adaptability are not worse than other things. It's just not the same. Sometimes being different is what saves you. Her face relaxed a little. But if you use this ship to hurt people, control them, or show that humans are better than everyone else, then I will have made the biggest mistake of my life by giving it to you. She walked back to the viewport and looked out at the stars again. Jake, the galaxy doesn't need another weapon. It needs faith. It needs proof that different kinds of animals can work together, learn from each other, and be stronger when they are together than when they are apart. This ship might be able to do that. Or maybe it really does need to be destroyed. You can choose that. Rebecca looked back at the camera one last time. I know you never knew me. I know this is all coming at you out of the blue. And I'm sorry about that. But the Morrison family has always done what they had to do, even when it was hard. Even when it was scary. I expect you to do the same. She reached for the camera's buttons. Good luck, Jake. You will need it. The screen turned black. After the message ended, Jake sat quietly for a long time, looking at his reflection in the dark screen. His mind was racing as it tried to make sense of everything he had just heard. This wasn't just a boat. It was a sentence. A test. A test of what people wanted to be. And somehow, impossibly, he had to make the choice. The message came 2 weeks after Jake left the nebula and traveled to New Brasilia, a rough frontier colony on the edge of space controlled by humans. It had been 2 weeks since he had decided not to run or hide anymore. 2 weeks after the rescue that made everything different. It was really just a lucky break that the rescue happened. Jake was trying to figure out how the Indomitable worked when Athena picked up a distress call from a civilian transport carrying families and refugees fleeing a corporate war in the outer colonies. Their engines had broken down, and they were drifting toward a field of debris that would rip them apart. Jake hadn't even given it a second thought. He had just told Athena to go help them. Jake had to work for 6 hours straight after that, and it was the hardest and scariest work of his life. Using the tractor beams on the Indomitable to keep the transport steady. Making new parts with the ship's fabrication systems. Using drones to do repairs that would kill a person. He saved 243 lives that would have been lost if he had just kept hiding. The cameras on the transport had recorded everything, and half of the colony's networks had shown it. Everyone knew right away that the Indomitable was back. Everyone knew that Jake Morrison was real. That was probably why he got the message. It came through encrypted channels which are expensive to set up and keep running. Professional. Military grade. The writing was clear and to the point. Mr. Morrison, I'm Robert Thorne. I knew Admiral Rebecca Morrison very well. We fought together in the war. We need to talk about what she really wanted for that ship. Come to these coordinates on New Brasilia by yourself. Everything you think you know will change when I tell you what I have to say. For a long time Jake looked at the message. Every part of him told him it was a trap. Or at the very least, a very bad idea. Athena's voice came through the room's speakers and said, Captain, I strongly advise against this meeting. The way the encryption is set up makes it look like it came from military intelligence. The wording is meant to make people want to know more. This looks like an attempt to manipulate. Jake said, I know. But what if he really did know Rebecca? What if she didn't write down everything in those logs? Then it would have been in her official messages to you. Captain, this is clearly... I'm going, Jake said, cutting in. But I'm not dumb about it. Keep my job locked up. Come get me if something goes wrong. Got it? Athena was quiet for a while. I don't like this, Captain. Understood. But I need to know. The meeting was planned for a bar in New Brasilia's industrial area called the Rusty Bolt. It was the kind of place where workers went after working 16 hours, where no questions were asked, and where the bartender was probably armed. Jake had been to places like this before. They were on every station and colony in human space. He got there early, checked out the exits and chose a table where he could see the door. Old habits from living in bad neighborhoods as a kid. Always be aware of where the exits are. Always have an exit. Robert Thorne came in right on time. The man was tall, probably in his 60s, and had iron gray hair cut short like a soldier's. He moved like someone who had been in war zones for years. He was aware of everything around him, balanced on the balls of his feet, and had his hands loose and ready. He was wearing civilian clothes, but they were so well-fitting that they could have been a uniform. Jake thought right away that they were former colonial Marines. Most likely an officer. For sure someone who had been in a lot of trouble. Thorne saw Jake and walked over to him. He walked with a steady, confident pace. He reached the table and held out his hand. Jake Morrison, he said in a deep, steady voice. Thanks for coming. I know you took a chance. Jake shook his hand. The grip was strong but not rough. Under control. You said you knew Rebecca Morrison. I did. Can I sit? Jake pointed to the chair in front of him. Thorne sat down with the same care that he had walked, with his back to the wall, just like Jake. There was no doubt that the man had been in the military. A server came by. She looked tired, like she'd been on her feet all day. Thorn asked for a neat whiskey. Jake wanted some coffee. He wanted to keep his mind clear. They didn't say anything until the drinks came. Thorn took a sip of his whiskey and enjoyed it like a man who hadn't had any in a long time. Rebecca Morrison was one of the best officers I ever worked with, Thorn said, looking off into space. Sharp. Tactical. Never thought twice about making decisions. We fought together in the last years of the Krell War. At that time, I was a major in charge of a Marine battalion. Before she became an admiral, she was my captain. Jake drank his coffee and waited. Let the guy speak. See where this was headed. Did she ever tell you why she really hid the Indomitable? Thorn's eyes suddenly became sharp and focused on Jake. She left me logs. Told her why she thought that. Did she? Thorn reclined in his chair. Did she say that she thought people were getting too soft? That we were letting the Galactic Council decide what would happen to us in the future, limit our potential, and keep us trapped like animals in a cage? Jake's grip on his coffee cup got a little tighter. She said the Council was worried about human engineering. About ships like the Indomitable. Nervous, Thorn said again, and then he laughed bitterly. That's one way to say it. Jake, let me tell you what really happened after the war. What they don't teach in the history feeds. He leaned in and spoke more quietly. We won that war. Sure, humanity and our allies, but let's be honest, it was human tactics and adaptability that made the difference. The Krell were winning for the first 5 years. Their ships were better. Their weapons were stronger. They should have beaten us by all logical standards. Thorn drank some more whiskey. But we didn't fight in a logical way. We fought unfairly. We made it up as we went along. We did things that didn't make sense on paper but worked anyway. And ships like the Indomitable were the best examples of that way of thinking. Not predictable. Can't be killed. Scary to fight against. Jake said, I know all of this. Rebecca told me about it. Did she tell you what happened at the peace talks? Thorn's eyes got hard. Did she tell you that the Council made it a condition of the treaty that the number of soldiers be cut? That they wanted us to get rid of our most advanced ships, limit the size of our fleet, and let observers on all new military construction? Jake didn't know that. Rebecca's log said there were limits, but they didn't say what they were. They said it was about keeping the peace, Thorn said. To make sure that no one species could rule over the others. Very fair. Very polite. But do you know what it really was? He didn't give Jake a chance to answer. Fear. Fear, plain and simple. They knew what humans could do when they were in trouble. They had seen us turn merchant ships into warships, mining tools into weapons, and every disadvantage into an advantage. And it scared them to death. Thorn finished his whiskey and asked for another. So they made sure we could never do it again. They used treaties, councils, and diplomatic language to cover it up, but the message was clear: you're too dangerous, humanity. We need to keep you on a leash. Jake looked at the man across from him. There was some truth to everything Thorn said. Jake had felt the casual disrespect from some alien species himself. The way they talked about how enthusiastic people were, like it was a bad thing. The rules that seemed to be there to stop people from getting too strong. And you think the Indomitable should be used to what? Jake asked with care. Begin another war? Thorn's face changed, becoming harder. Colder. I think it should be used to remind the galaxy that people don't kneel. That we're not just another species that needs to be managed and kept in check. We have the right to choose our own future without asking anyone else. Jake said firmly. Rebecca didn't believe that. Are you sure? Thorn bent over. You read some of the logs she kept years ago. I worked with her. I fought with her. When she talked about what people could be like if we weren't being held back, I could see the fire in her eyes. He took out a data pad and slid it across the table. These are notes. Between Rebecca and I. Going back 30 years. Look at them. You'll find out what she really thought. Jake looked at the data pad but didn't touch it. Thorn went on. Rebecca hid that ship for a reason. Not to keep it from people. To protect it until people were ready to use it correctly. Until we were ready to say, that's enough. No more limits. No more limits. Stop treating us like kids. And you just happen to have a plan for all of that? Jake asked, his voice full of doubt. Thorn smiled. I am a member of a group called the Vanguard. Mostly people who used to be in the military. People who remember when people were proud. We have support from dozens of colonies. Resources. Boats. People who are ready to act. How to act? By making it clear to the Council that we won't be pushed around anymore. No violence, no aggression. Just showing what you can do. Things to remember: Human technology, human creativity, and human willpower are not things to be afraid of and kept inside. People should respect them. Jake picked up his coffee and took a long drink to give himself time to think. Rebecca had warned in her logs that this would happen, using the indomitable as a sign of human superiority instead of human ability. But what Thorne said meant something. Jake had felt the same way, like species that were afraid of what we might become were holding back humanity. Finally, Jake said, "I need time to think about this." Thorne nodded and got up. "Of course. Take your time. But Jake, that rescue you did? That was only the beginning of what the indomitable can do. Think about what you could do if you had the right help. With tools. With a crew that knows what that ship really means." He put a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Rebecca picked you for a reason. She noticed something about you. Don't let her down by being too scared to accept what that ship really is." Thorne left money on the table for the drinks and walked out, moving with the same precise, military-like speed. Jake stayed alone in the bar for a long time after that, looking at the data pad that Thorne had left behind. At last he picked it up and put it in his pocket. He had to find out if Thorne was being honest. Jake read the messages on Thorne's data pad for 2 days. It was like looking into a warped mirror for 2 days and seeing familiar words turned into something scary. He had Athena check to make sure the messages were real. There really were messages between Rebecca Morrison and Robert Thorne that went on for 30 years. But the more Jake read, the more he got what Thorne had done. He had taken away all the context around Rebecca's complaints about council rules, her anger at being left out, and her frustration. All the details. Every time she talked about working together and understanding. Thorne had taken a complicated, smart woman and turned her into a bunch of angry quotes that backed up his point of view. Jake erased everything on the data pad and made his choice. 3 weeks later, he stood outside the Galactic Council chamber on the Luminar's homeworld, a planet that was always in twilight and bathed in the soft light of a binary star system. The building itself was a work of art in crystalline architecture, rising like a frozen tornado made of glass and light. Jake had never felt less at home in his life. Ambassador Daniel Foster, the Luminar diplomat who had talked to Jake after the rescue, asked, "Are you ready for this?" In the dim light, Foster sparkled, and his crystal body bent colors that people couldn't describe. "Not at all," Jake said. "Not even a little bit." "Good," Foster said, and his voice sounded like it might have been funny. "If you were sure, I'd be worried that you didn't know what you were getting into." The doors to the council chamber opened with a sound like wind chimes, and Jake walked into a room with people from 300 different species. The chamber was huge, with a spiral shape that went hundreds of feet above him. Each type of animal had its own area that was made to meet its needs. Aquatic species lived in huge spheres full of water. Life forms made of gas swirled around in containment fields. Silicon-based creatures sat on platforms made of very hot rock. There were also species that Jake couldn't even begin to categorize. There were beings of pure energy, creatures that lived in more than one dimension at the same time, and entities that went against everything he knew about biology. And they were all looking at him. Jake walked to the center podium, and his footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. He could feel hundreds of eyes, or things that looked like eyes, following him. Their attention felt like it had weight. He got to the podium and looked up at the people who were there. Somewhere up there were the council members who had voted to destroy the Indomitable. There were people who didn't vote. And there were a few people who had said that maybe, just maybe, the ship deserved a chance. Jake coughed. The sound system picked it up and made it louder in the whole room. "Members of the Galactic Council," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. "Jake Morrison is my name. 6 weeks ago, I was a maintenance engineer working on an orbital platform to fix coolant relays. I own the most controversial warship in the galaxy today. This month has been strange. A few people made sounds that could have been laughter. Jake thought that was a good sign. Ever since I got the Indomitable, pirates have been after me to steal it. Human supremacist groups have asked me to use it as a symbol of power. I've had military officers, corporate representatives, and more lawyers than I can count tell me what to do with this ship." He stopped and looked around the room. "But here's what I've learned in the last 6 weeks. The Indomitable is more than just a ship. It's a question. And the question is, what kind of galaxy do we want to build together?" There were murmurs in the room, clicks, whistles, harmonic resonances, and other sounds that Jake couldn't understand. He turned on the holographic display which showed video from the transport rescue. 243 civilians were pulled from a sinking ship, families were brought back together, and children who would have died in the cold vacuum of space were now safe and alive. This ship saved all these lives because it could do things that no other ship in the area could do at that time. Not because it's better than your ships. Not because Krell tactical design, Vexery efficiency calculations, or Luminar aesthetic integration are better than human engineering. As Jake spoke, he turned to look at different parts of the room. It helped them because it's not the same. Because of how we think about engineering, our love of redundancy, our ability to deal with chaos, and our refusal to believe that there is only one way to solve any problem. That difference gave us choices when there weren't any perfect ones. A Krell representative, a huge, armored creature that looked like it had been carved from living stone, stood up. The person talks about difference. But this difference has caused problems in the past. To things that are hard to predict. To weapons that go against the rules of controlled warfare. Jake nodded. You're right. Ships made by people are not always reliable. We don't use the best design patterns. Your best tactical computers can't predict how our ships can change themselves. And yes, that made us dangerous during the war. He stared straight at the Krell representative. But the war ended 160 years ago. We should stop seeing that unpredictability as a threat and start seeing it as a chance. What kind of opportunity? Asked a member of the Vexery Council, waving its many arms in disbelief. To get around the treaty limits for people? So your kind can build up a military power that scares the rest of us? Jake said no firmly. An opportunity to mix our different ways of doing things. To make something that none of us could make on our own. He changed the holographic display to show a diagram that he and Athena had been working on for days. I want to turn the Indomitable into something that has never existed before. A ship that can respond quickly to crises involving multiple species. Disasters that happen in nature. Operations to save people. Times when following the rules isn't as important as being on time and being able to think on your feet. Hundreds of different species were all trying to talk at once, and the chamber was full of noise. Jake waited until it was quiet before moving on. He said loudly over the noise, this ship wouldn't be controlled by humans alone. I'm suggesting that we share command. A crew made up of people from different species. Yes, we can adapt, but we can also do Krell tactical analysis. Vexery management of efficiency. Integration of Luminar systems. Each species doing what it does best. Impossible, someone yelled from the top. Too many interests that are at odds with each other. There are too many different ways to do things. It would be a mess. Yes, Jake said. It would be a mess. And people are really, really good at dealing with chaos. That made another sound ripple through the room, but Jake couldn't tell if it was funny or rude. A being made of swirling light came down from the upper levels. Jake thought it was one of the Luminar elders because other representatives made room for it. It said, Human Morrison, and its voice sounded like crystal bells. Your proposal is one of a kind. You want us to believe that species that have very different ways of building things, solving problems, and even living can work together on a ship made for war. Jake said, I'm asking you to trust that we can work together on a ship that is meant to save lives. The Indomitable was made for war. Let's build it again for peace, I say. The Luminar elder asked, what if this experiment fails? What if these different ways of thinking can't live together? What if the chaos you talk about managing gets out of hand? Jake looked into the elder's eyes, or what he thought were its eyes. Then we will have failed at trying something new instead of being afraid of each other. There was silence in the chamber. Jake kept going. Okay, I understand. I'm just a guy who works on air conditioning systems. I'm not a diplomat, a military strategist, or anything else you think should be here. But maybe that's why I should be the one to say this. He pointed to the hologram that showed the rescue. People didn't care that the ship that saved them was made by people. They didn't care about the best design patterns or engineering philosophy. They were happy that someone was there to help when they needed it. The Indomitable could be that ship, the one that comes when everything else fails. A Krell officer in charge of tactics stood. And who is in charge of this ship? Who makes the final choices when things go wrong? Your plan needs everyone to be on the same page, but a crisis needs strong leadership. Shared command, Jake said. Yes, a human captain for changing situations. That's where we shine. But a Krell tactical officer for making plans. A Vexery chief engineer is in charge of managing resources. A Luminar systems coordinator for bringing things together. We make a command structure that takes advantage of the strengths of each species. You're talking about a committee? Someone yelled. Committees don't deal with emergencies. No, Jake said. I'm talking about a group of people. Teams are always ready to handle emergencies. People with different skills work together because that's how you solve hard problems. The argument lasted for hours. Species Jake had never heard of spoke up to voice their worries. Some people agreed with the idea. Some people suggested changes. Some people said he should be arrested right away for breaking treaty rules just by having the ship. Jake stood at the podium the whole time and answered every question as honestly as he could. He said he didn't know something when he didn't. When he was asked about technical details, Athena sent him information through a small earpiece. When they asked him what he was going to do, he told them the truth. He was scared, unsure, and totally out of his depth, but he thought this was the right thing to do. Finally, after what felt like forever, the elder of the Luminar called for a vote. It said, "The proposal before this council is unprecedented. We are being asked to believe that a weapon of war can be used for peace. That species with very different ways of doing things can work together. That the things that used to separate us can now bring us together." The elder's light got brighter and brighter. "This is either very wise or very foolish. Now we will choose one." It took 3 hours to vote. Jake couldn't stay in the chamber for it. Human observers were taken to a waiting room, where Jake paced nervously while Ambassador Foster stayed perfectly still, his crystalline form reflecting the light in changing patterns. Jake's heart was beating so hard that he could hear it in his ears when they finally called him back. The elder from Luminar said, "The Galactic Council has voted. The proposal is accepted by a vote of 173 to 127, with some people not voting." Jake's knees started to give out. Foster steadied him with a clear hand. "The Indomitable will be under the joint supervision of the Council and humans for a trial period of 5 standard years," the elder said. "Captain Morrison will still be in charge, but he will have a senior staff made up of people from different species. The Council Emergency Response Committee will tell the ship how to respond to emergencies. This test will decide whether to order more ships like this one." The elder looked straight at Jake. "Captain Morrison, you have made us want to try something new. Do not make us wish we hadn't done this." "I'll do my best," Jake was able to say. Jake noticed that his hands were shaking as he left the room. He had just changed the history of the galaxy. Or he would have just set himself up for the most spectacular failure anyone has ever seen.